Hello. All right. Last two chapters of Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom by Lewis Satcher. I've had fun. Hope you have too. Chapter 29, After the Storm. So the Cloud of Doom has burst open. We found Mrs. Zarves, although we think we found Mrs. Zarves. And we've collected 1 million toenails and fingernail clippings. So let's see what happens on the down slope. The boops and booms had stopped and the lights were back on. Myron and the others had to step over all sorts of objects as they made their way back up toward their classroom. The stairs were strewn with books, papers, cafeteria trays, musical instruments, an air pump, a giant stuffed walrus, and even a bust of Sigmund Freud. Between the 26th and 27th floors, the stairs were completely blocked off by Mr. Kidswater's enormous desk. They all had fun climbing over it, including Mrs. Jules. Once back in class, Myron dropped Ms. Zarv's fingernail into the bucket, which unfortunately was empty. Sadly, the other 999 clippings were gone. Myron would have written 1 million on the blackboard anyway, but there was no blackboard. The chalk was there, however. It was as if everything inside Wayside School had been shuffled like a deck of cards and dealt out randomly to every floor. Mrs. Jules's blackboard was eventually discovered in the library. Fingernails and toenails would continue to be found for years to come, sometimes in very strange places. The sun shined, the sky was blue as Allison's eyes. Birds chirped as they flew about. There had been no birds during the dark days of the doom. Lewis, the yard teacher, shoveled snow off the roof. Among other things, the cloud had dumped huge amounts of snow. The playground sparkled white. Lewis had to be careful. The snow was packed high above the guardrails and was very slippery. "Look out below," he shouted as he tossed a shovel full of snow over the edge. Down below, the kids were playing a kind of reverse dodgeball. It was the boys against the girls. Every time Lewis shouted, "Look out below," they did the opposite. Eric Ovens charged past Jenny and dived face first, sliding across the snow-covered ground. Lewis's clump smacked him right on the head. "1 point," he exclaimed. Recess was 3 hours today. The kids had been sent out to play while the teachers were stuck with cleaning up the mess made by the storm. Just as Mrs. Jules had predicted, now that the cloud of doom was gone, the world had become a happier place. The only thing missing was a rainbow. "Look out below," Lewis called from the other side of the school. They raced around the building. Leslie dived toward the falling clump. "1 point," she declared. "No way, Miss Piggytail," said Terrence. "It missed you." "Did not," Leslie insisted. "See, look at all the snow in my hair." "That's ground snow," argued Terrence. Dana came to Leslie's defense. "Some of it came from the ground," she agreed, "but 4 flakes came from the air. I saw them." "How can you see 4 snowflakes?" asked Paul. "Super glasses," said Dana, pointing to her spectacles. She picked 4 snowflakes out of Leslie's hair. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Just like I told you." "That proves it," declared Phoebe. 1 point. Paul scowled. He remained skeptical of her spectacles. Up on the roof, Lewis spotted something sticking out of the snow. It was purple and green with some yellow dots. He tried to pull it free, but it was stuck. He pulled hard. It still wouldn't budge. He gave it 1 hard yank. The umbrella jerked free, but Lewis's feet slipped out from under him. He fell on his bottom and slid backwards across the roof. "Look out below," he shouted as he went over the edge. The children all ran to the call. They were quite surprised when they looked up and saw the yard teacher coming towards them. Lewis looked down. He didn't want to hurt the children. He considered trying a Mary Poppins, where you open it and float down with the umbrella, but he was holding the wrong end of the umbrella and there wasn't time to change his grip and try to open it. His best chance was to grab the top of the flagpole. Wayside School had an extra tall flagpole so it wouldn't look so puny next to the building. Louis reached out for it but missed. The next thing he knew, he was spinning wildly in circles. The curved handle of the umbrella had hooked the pole. Louis whirled dizzily around until it slowly moved down the pole. By the time he reached the ground, he must have circled the flagpole more than 1,000 times. Sherry ran to him. To Louis, it looked like there were 6 Sherrys all spinning like tops. "Thank you, Louis. You're the best," said Sherry, taking her umbrella. "But really, there was no big rush. You could have just used the stairs." Sherry got her umbrella back. Yay. All right. I'm going to continue Rainbow, chapter 30. Let's finish. There was no stove in the cafeteria kitchen. An enormous pot hung from a thick chain above a blazing fire. "Lower the pot," ordered Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperator turned the squeaky crank and pot came down. "What will it be today?" he asked. "Shh," said Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperator knew better. He must never interrupt a great artist during her moment of inspiration. Miss Mush's eyes were closed. She rubbed her chin. She wanted to make something truly special after the storm of doom. "Rainbow stew," she declared as she raised her wooden spoon high above her head. "Brilliant," agreed Mr. Pepperator. "What do we have that's red?" said Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperator looked over his inventory list. "Red cabbage," he said. "Beets, strawberries, red peppers." Miss Mush waved the wooden spoon and said, "Toss them in the pot." Flames shot up from Mr. Pepperator's stew and the ingredients. He had to shield his eyes from the smoke. "What about yellow?" asked Miss Mush. "Yellow squash, bananas, yellow peppers, yellow onions." "Start with the bananas," said Miss Mush, "and then we'll see about the onions." Mr. Pepperator started to peel a banana, but Miss Mush stopped him. "The peel is that part that's yellow," she reminded him. "If I wanted white, I would have asked for peeled bananas." "Sorry," said Mr. Pepperator. He tossed 57 bushels of bananas, peels and all, into the pot. There was a loud hissing noise as steam filled the room. Some cooks considered things like taste or perhaps nutrition when preparing a meal. For rainbow stew, color was all that mattered. Miss Mush stirred the pot with a large stick. "Perhaps a little black now for definition," she said. Mr. Pepperator read from his list. "Poppy seeds, burnt toast, my shoes." High above them, in Mrs. Jules's class, several children held their noses. "What's that smell?" asked Calvin. "Miss Mush must be cooking something," said Bibi. "It smells like shoes," said Myron. DJ sniffed. "Black shoes," he said, "with hard soles and no laces." "You can smell the laces?" asked Kathy. "No," said DJ. "I just told you there weren't any laces." Mr. Kidswater's voice came over the speaker. "Good morning, students. It's another great day here at..." There was a sound of paper rustling. Like he didn't know what school he was at. "Wayside School. For lunch today, Miss Mush will be serving rainbow stew. It will be the greatest lunch ever." 15 floors beneath them, Miss Mush felt her stomach tighten. She too heard Mr. Kidswater's morning announcement. Now the pressure was on. She climbed a ladder and stared down into the bubbling pot. Her face was covered with soot and sweat. Something orange, she decided. "How about oranges?" suggested Mr. Pepperator. "Too obvious," said Miss Mush. "Carrots?" "I suppose," said Miss Mush, although carrots didn't feel right to her. Inspiration struck. 18 pumpkins, she exclaimed. Each pumpkin made a giant splash as Miss Mush and Mr. Pepperator took turns tossing them into the pot. After all the pumpkins were added to the stew, a tiny smile crept across Miss Mush's face. It was a smile that all great artists know well. After years of self-doubt, she started to believe that she was on the verge of creating something truly wonderful. But it was just a quick smile and then back to work. The doubts always return. The lunch bell kaboinged and the children descended upon the cafeteria. "Rainbow stew," said Benjamin. "It sounds like it could be good." "Don't let the name fool you," warned Todd. "The better the name, the worse it tastes." "Remember when she made Midnight Madness?" asked Paul. "Don't even say it," snapped Leslie. "I was up all night running around in circles." Miss Mush and Mr. Pepperator stood shoulder to shoulder as the children lined up. They had finished the stew only moments before. I hope they like it, Miss Mush whispered. They will, Mr. Pepper assured her. He wore short pants, black socks, and no shoes. So his shoes were in the stew. Miss Mush hoped he was right, but all her doubts had returned. Her apron was splotched with lots of bright colors, but the rainbow stew looked like lumpy grayish-brown mud. She didn't understand it. What had happened to all the colors? Mauricia reached the front of the line. Miss Mush scooped her rainbow stew into a bowl and handed it to her. Thank you, Miss Mush, said Mauricia, always polite. Sorry, it was supposed to be a bit more colorful, explained Miss Mush. I don't know what went wrong. Joy was next. Sorry, Miss Mush said again as she handed a bowl up to Joy. Sorry, Ron, she said. Sorry, Dee Dee. Sorry, Joe. Sorry, John. Sorry. Allison and Rondi sat at one end of a long table. Are you going to eat it? Rondi asked Allison. I have a tangerine in my pocket, Allison said. Maybe I'll just eat that. Rondi watched as Allison slowly removed the entire peel in just one piece. Dee Dee counted the points on her fork. DJ swirled his plastic fork around the gray muck. Well, here goes, he announced. He poked his fork into something solid. It could have been a vegetable, or maybe a piece of meat, or perhaps part of a shoe. He lowered his fork. Maybe later, he said. Looks delicious, Kathy said enthusiastically. She took a big spoonful, brought it to her mouth, and swallowed. Yummy, she declared. The other kids couldn't be sure. They could never tell anymore when Kathy was speaking in opposites. Calvin stabbed something gooey with his fork. He brought it to his mouth, chewed a while, and then chewed some more. Well, asked Bibi. Calvin wasn't sure how to describe it. Red, he said at last. Red? Questioned Allison. That's a color, not a taste. And blue, said Calvin. Rondi took a bite. She chewed a while. Purple, she declared. I taste yellow, said Todd. Dana swallowed. Pink, she exclaimed. John finished chewing, then swallowed. Kind of a blue-green, he said. It's delicious, said Sherry. Purple and green with yellow polka dots. The more they chewed, the more colors they tasted. That's silly, said Allison. She took a bite. Her eyes shone. She tasted orange with green and purple stripes and a black outline. Do you like it? Asked Rondi. Only the best lunch ever, said Allison. Mr. Pepperator grabbed and shook Miss Mush's arm. They like it, he said excitedly. Look at them, they really like it. Miss Mush didn't say a word. A tear rolled down her sweaty, sooty cheek. Did you write down the recipe, he asked. Miss Mush shook her head. There is no recipe, he whispered. No two rainbows are the same. She gazed out across the lunchroom. This was all she ever wanted. Everybody chewed. Well, it's been a delight. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.